Picture this moment. Austin King, a young and experienced hiker, decides to conquer Eagle Peak, one of the most difficult and beautiful places in Yellowstone Park. But what begins as another challenge of nature turns into a nightmare when his connection with the world is cut off in the midst of a terrifying storm. With every step there is more fog, rain, and fear. His final journal entry predicts the end, but no one knows what happens next. The fog hides not only his path, but also the darkest secrets of the mountains. What happened to Austin? Why do his tracks disappear into thin air, and the search that continues for months does not bring answers? Strange symbols, mysterious lights, and even voices in the woods. What do these places hide? Maybe it is not just nature, but something much more dangerous. Stay tuned to find out how this story ends. And don't forget to subscribe if you want more. On that September day, Austin King, a 22-year-old employee of one of the departments of Yellowstone National Park, was determined to conquer Eagle Peak, one of the highest peaks hidden among the mighty mountains. His preparation was thorough. Maps, satellite communications, experience on many routes, and several months of work in the park gave him confidence in his abilities. Austin knew that nature here is harsh and the climate is unpredictable. He was well aware that this is not just a hike, but a real test that will give him an opportunity to understand what he is capable of. On September 14th, when his journey began, there was no sign of a storm on the horizon, no hint of the disaster that lay ahead. Austin was in excellent physical condition, mentally prepared, and ready for a difficult but exciting journey. He had risen early to take advantage of every minute of daylight. His route had been carefully planned, taking into account all possible risks. But something was bound to go wrong on this journey. All he had to do was wait for that moment. The place he was heading to was especially attractive to tourists. Eagle Peak, more than 3.3 kilometers high, was known for its scenic beauty and incredible panoramic views. The summit promised to be his triumph, especially considering that Austin had admired the beauty of this place many times during the summer while working in the park, exploring the most remote corners. He was prepared for difficult conditions, knew that the mountains could be merciless, but he was determined. The first days of the hike went according to plan. He left his mark on the difficult trails and enjoyed the unique atmosphere of the reserve. Yellowstone nature did not forgive the weak, but it could be kind to those who understood its subtleties. There were many challenges ahead, but it was possible to stay alive and healthy here. Every step, every decision was important, and Austin felt his body and mind merge with nature, becoming a part of this majestic, mysterious wilderness. He kept in touch with family and friends, sending messages via satellite phone. "All is well, Heavy Rains, but I will continue," he wrote on September 17th, the day before his summit bid. According to his loved ones, he was calm despite the approaching bad weather. Fog, rain, and wind had become his new companions, but Austin, an experienced hiker, had no intention of postponing his ascent. "I will get to the summit," he repeated, as if encouraging himself. There was no fear in his voice, only determination and confidence. However, by the time Austin neared the summit, the weather had begun to deteriorate rapidly. Strong gusts of wind, rain, and snow had all descended on the mountainside, and Austin found himself in the middle of an element that he would have to face head-on. He was no stranger to this kind of thing. He knew he could handle this turn of events. But something inside him began to tell him that this storm was more than just a natural phenomenon. The dark fog that had settled over the mountains and the feeling that someone invisible was watching him began to make him uneasy. It was at this moment, standing on the cold summit, that Austin wrote the last entry in his journal. His hands were frozen, his breathing was heavy, and his glasses were fogged up by the cold air. He felt his thoughts beginning to fade into the darkness. And here is his message to his family. "I am on Eagle Peak. Strong wind and fog, I am disoriented. I may be on the wrong route, but I will continue. This is a day I will never forget for the rest of my life. His last entry seemed to foretell disaster, but no one knew what would happen next. At that moment, Austin had no idea that the elements he had fought were only the beginning of what awaited him in the foggy emptiness of the mountains. Within a few hours, his connection with the world was cut off. On September 20th, when he was supposed to return to the boat, no one was waiting for him. The fog that thickened over the summit not only hid his path, but also became a symbol of everything that followed. As September 21st rolled around, the search continued to intensify. Working in bad weather conditions in Yellowstone National Park had never been easy, especially in remote mountain areas that could hide a host of dangers. But now that Austin King was reported missing, the situation became critical. Suddenly, the disappearance of an experienced hiker who was confident in his abilities changed the perception of the safety of such trips. Rescuers, rangers, and volunteers now worked side by side, trying to find any trace of him. Austin's route was quite difficult, and his path crossed territory that was little explored. Although every step was recorded in his journal, no one knew what exactly might have happened to him when the fog became impenetrable. There was nothing left at the place where Austin was supposed to have passed. No tracks, no equipment, which would normally have been easy to find if something had gone wrong. When search parties arrived at his supposed resting place in the Upper Howell Creek area, they were met with a complete absence of any traces. Austin's campsite appeared to be untouched. His tent was pitched, and his backpack was nearby, but no one could find any trace of his presence. His camera, smartphone, and other personal belongings were all still there. What was even more strange was that there were no signs of a struggle, no traces of animals. This seemed especially paradoxical because such places usually attract wild animals, such as bears, foxes, and wolves. But no traces of animals were found, which made the usual logic of what was happening even more questionable. That was the first big warning sign. No tracks, no signs of a struggle, nothing to explain his disappearance. Every detail, every element of his campsite raised new questions. A search of the area yielded no results. At first, it was thought that Austin might have gone to a safer shelter to wait out the storm. But even so, there should have been traces of his path, and there were none. This made the rescue team suspect the worst. Soon, searchers began using more advanced methods, drones, dogs, and drones equipped with special night vision equipment. Remembering his last messages, they decided to search the Eagle Peak area and adjacent areas of the national forest. But there were no traces here either. Vast areas covered in dense forests and rugged cliffs offered no answers, and poor weather conditions only made the search more difficult. But despite all the care and work, something was found. At the top of Eagle Peak, where Austin, according to his diary, had been on September 17th, his tracks were found. But these were no ordinary tracks. They were a note he had written on the day he disappeared. The text was illegible, barely legible, as if he had written with difficulty holding the pencil. But it was a message, his last words about how he could not find the right path, about the strong winds and poor visibility. "I can't feel my fingers," Austin wrote. "I can't figure out where I'm going. I'm going the wrong way. I'm in the wrong direction. It's so terrible here. The weather is unbearable. Rain, snow, hail. I'm too tired to go on. I can't even believe I've gotten this far. I can't breathe. I can't see. Everything is just disappearing." This diary entry was truly disturbing. It was filled with anxiety and despair. He ended the entry with the phrase, "Today will be my last day. I won't survive this storm." Austin's last words sounded like a prophecy, like a revelation, but they also made the searchers take another step back. The fog on Eagle Peak, and these words now sounded like a warning. He felt like he couldn't cope with the situation, like the nature around him was beginning to swallow him up, like an insurmountable wall. Whoever was there knew for sure that his chances of surviving on this mountain were rapidly diminishing. Thus ended one chapter of a story that had begun to take unexpected turns. The weather on the mountain continued to worsen, but the searchers did not give up. They followed every trail, every turn of events, even when it all began to seem pointless. On the horizon, in the distant and unpredictable lands of Yellowstone, fog obscured not only visibility, but the very truth of what had happened to Austin. As the searchers continued their efforts, they began to encounter a new mystery. Despite the intensity of the search, none of the locations they found provided clear answers. Everything remained in the shadows, as if the Yellowstone nature itself was hiding something behind its dark fogs and rapidly changing weather. As time passed, there was a growing sense that Austin's disappearance was not an accident, but part of something much larger and more terrifying. It was then that Austin's family, despite the official end of the search operation, decided to act in their own way. His father, Brian King, decided to resume the search in the spring of 2022, when the melting snow would make the area more accessible. But until that was possible, anxiety was in the air, and the thoughts of loved ones did not give them peace. He couldn't just disappear. He was too prepared, too experienced to be swallowed up by nature, his father said. With each passing day, more and more people, including tourists and locals, began to perceive what had happened as something more than just an accidental loss. It became clear to everyone that Yellowstone was not just a place of wild nature with its own dangers, but something more mysterious, something that defied any logical explanation. Locals had been telling stories of strange events happening in the park even before Austin disappeared. Stories of mysterious lights, strange sounds, and strange sensations, as if someone was always watching you, became part of the folklore of the region. These rumors grew mystical, becoming more widespread with each passing year, adding to the tension. All this information made authorities and experts wonder, was Austin's disappearance connected to some natural disaster or something supernatural? But those who were more deeply involved in the investigation began to conclude that the disappearance could be something more than just a tragedy. Some even began to look for parallels with previous cases where tourists had disappeared without a trace, and no one could give a clear explanation. Despite this, almost all experts and investigators believed that something more mundane, if inexplicable, might be behind the disappearance. One of the most popular theories was that Austin had accidentally become disoriented, lost his way, and ended up in impassable mountainous areas where poorly processed maps and satellite data were of no help. But questions still remained. Why was his gear, even parts of his tent and backpack, in perfect condition? Why were there no signs of a struggle, even though the area was known for its high risk of animal attacks? As the search efforts intensified, several hikers in the area began sharing their strange experiences. One of them was a seasoned hiker who at one point described his hike as something quite frightening. He claimed that in the Eagle Peak area, he felt a look, a presence, that seemed to be watching him even though no one was around. His account matched what other people who had been in the area had described. They said that in the area, it always felt like someone was watching you, something invisible, elusive, as if nature itself was haunting and hiding something that was beyond the limits of normal perception. It was at this point, when many began to believe in supernatural forces, that authorities began to look for more rational explanations. One theorist even hypothesized that Austin's disappearance might be linked to so-called abnormal zones in the park, where spatial anomalies could lead people astray or confuse them. These theories about dark zones supposedly breaking into reality sounded like something beyond scientific explanation, but they attracted attention. Some researchers argued that existing geothermal processes hidden underground could affect people's perceptions, causing them to have strange sensations or even hallucinations. Others believed that the strong magnetic fields characteristic of Yellowstone could play a role in disorientation. But all of these theories, while valid, did not provide clear answers to the question, why could no one find traces of Austin despite all the efforts and modern technology? With each passing day, the uncertainty grew. Austin's family continued to search for answers despite the lack of official leads, and the idea that Austin's disappearance was part of a larger, darker mystery grew stronger in the air. "Something's wrong in these mountains," one of his friends said. And that phrase, spoken in utter anxiety, became a word that many now uttered aloud as they witnessed strange phenomena in Yellowstone National Park. All these suspicions and versions, from the most rational to the mystical, only deepened the mystery that still hung over Yellowstone. As the months passed, the search for Austin King yielded no results. Time and nature seemed to consume everything connected to his disappearance. Yellowstone Park, with its majestic mountains and mighty forests, had become for many a symbol not only of beauty, but also of the danger lurking in its most remote corners. It was full of mysteries, but Austin's disappearance raised the question, why does nature so persistently hide the answers? Despite all efforts, the search operation came to a logical end in October 2022. As the weather began to deteriorate and icy winds brought snowstorms, the search team officially declared it impossible to continue. But that did not mean the end of the search. Austin's family, despite everything, continued to fight for answers, not wanting to give up their hope. Austin's father, Brian, decided to take what many considered a hopeless step. He promised to continue the search, regardless of the weather conditions and without official help. But despite the desire of family and friends, the search was difficult. The terrain remained inaccessible, not only to humans, but also to technology. Satellite images, infrared sensors, and drones all failed to provide clear clues. Even search dogs trained to find humans could find no trace. The terrain was difficult to traverse, and each day of searching became a battle with nature itself. The eerie emptiness surrounding Eagle Peak and other areas where Austin might have been offered no evidence of his presence. Everything seemed empty and lifeless. Meanwhile, Austin's story began to gain even more momentum in the media, and this drew attention to the strange events happening in Yellowstone Park. Locals began to talk about nightlights that they saw from afar. In the darkness, among the dense forest, these flickering lights did not look like simple lanterns or any other familiar light phenomena. People who saw them described them as something strange and inexplicable. These lights were not recorded on maps, were not associated with known places where light sources could be installed. They moved, disappeared, appeared in the most unexpected places. Wind, leaves, fog. Everything around seemed to contribute to the creation of a mystical atmosphere in which dark shadows became alive. Some tourists began to joke that these lights were the souls of the missing, but such jokes also caused anxiety among those who did not believe in the supernatural. However, these lights became more frequent, and people began to wonder, perhaps this is a sign that something strange is happening in this place. Local guides said that they had seen these lights before, but they never paid attention to it, considering them just a natural phenomenon until Austin's disappearance. Now everything looked different. As the search continued into the spring of 2023, it was no longer just a matter for Austin's family. More and more people, including volunteers, joined the search, inspired by the story and legends that began to grow around his disappearance. They were willing to go where the tracks had disappeared, despite the difficulties, and they themselves said that something strange was happening in these mountains. Research began again, but now, in addition to the usual search methods, the version that Austin's disappearance may have a supernatural nature was increasingly heard. People who had previously been skeptical of stories about mysterious phenomena began to change their point of view. Absorbed in the search, Austin's father continued to insist that his son was alive. "He's still out there somewhere. He just can't find his way home," he said, going out again and again to the areas Austin had last visited. The search continued, but it was at this point that new details emerged that added even more strangeness to the story. One night, a strange incident occurred in the search group. One of the participants, following the trail, noticed a pair of small lights appear in front of him. These lights did not seem to be a source of light, but rather something moving in the void. He tried to follow them, but as soon as he got closer, the lights disappeared, leaving him in complete silence and darkness. Remembering the stories of others about similar phenomena, he came to the conclusion that this was something more than just an optical illusion. The next morning, the group found a strange trail, not a footprint or gear, but a torn branch, as if someone had tried to hide among the trees. But there was no person nearby. It was inexplicable and eerie. Perhaps it was just a coincidence, but the branch became a symbol of another unsolved mystery that now continued to haunt Austin's search. The fog that covered these places was not just a natural phenomenon, it was a ghost that prevented access to the truth, hiding traces and evidence, preventing one from understanding what happened to the one who disappeared and what was really happening in these mountains. The summer of 2023, as the search for Austin continued, was the time when the popular belief in the mystery of Yellowstone reached its peak. Despite the apparent futility of the search, a group of volunteers and investigators continued to walk the trails and look for at least some signs of what could have happened to Austin. Nature was their only enemy, and all efforts were reduced to one simple goal: to find traces, even the smallest clues that could provide an answer. But something strange was happening in these mountains. Even experienced tourists who came looking for Austin began to feel something inexplicable. They encountered the fact that the map showed one way, but reality gave completely different results. Paths that they had walked several times began to seem alien, and natural landmarks, as they did not remember them. Often they came across seemingly familiar places, but with them it was not as before. A particularly disturbing incident occurred when one of the search parties discovered strange tracks in the dense forest, not far from where Austin had last been seen. The tracks did not look like normal human or animal tracks. They were indistinct, blurry, but it felt like someone, or something, was moving through the area, leaving traces that could not be explained by normal methods. The tracks disappeared, as if an invisible wall cut off the tracks in front of them, cutting off any attempt to understand where they were leading. No signs of life, no outlines, only emptiness and blurred prints. The group engaged in this search could not understand why the tracks they had found disappeared into the very center of the forest, as if something were swallowing them up, wiping them off the face of the earth. Surprise and anxiety began to grow. Some of the mission participants began to whisper about strange phenomena they had seen before. Lights, shadows that seemed to appear among the trees, defying logic. It all began to fit together into one general picture, a picture of something that could not be explained, something supernatural. The search became even more desperate, and the tension within the team grew. Some of the volunteers began to lose confidence in their success. But despite this, others could not stop, for they believed that somewhere in these woods there remained the truth, a truth that had been hidden for too long. Each place they found, each strange detail, left them more confused. They continued searching, driven by their determination, as if each step brought them closer to the solution. As the search continued, a new threat appeared on the horizon. Desolate areas that had once been green and full of life were now empty and lifeless. Animal tracks had disappeared, and the few signs of nature that remained seemed to be subject to an unknown force that was trying to hide something. These empty spaces could not be explained by geographical or natural processes. They led into the unknown, as if sucking out everything that could shed light on what was happening. One of the strangest discoveries during this period was a recorded audio file found in what was apparently Austin's last known location. The file was recorded by his satellite device and contained his voice. However, despite the fact that it was his words, the atmosphere did not seem to correspond to his normal state. "I don't know how to move forward. I'm here, and I feel something creeping up on me. It's watching. I can feel it right next to me. I can't figure out what's going on. I hear voices, but they shouldn't be here. I don't know what to do, but I have to keep going." The last sentence on the recording sounded with obvious fear and tension. At the time of the recording, experts assumed that Austin was in a panic. However, what shocked everyone was the fact that shortly after that, the recording stopped. The device's readings disappeared as if it had been turned off by nature itself. As the search expanded, the tracks seemed to become more and more inexplicable. Participants who entered the danger zone found strange stones carved with symbols they could not identify. These images did not fit any known cultural or archaeological theories. They looked like something that could not even belong to this era, but to something from another world. More and more people began to theorize that what was happening in Yellowstone Park could be connected to ancient mysteries that engulf everything in their path. And Austin's disappearance was not just a tragedy, but part of a larger and more dangerous, mystical picture. In the meantime, the search continued, leaving behind only vanished traces, empty spaces, and mysterious symbols. With each step, with each new discovery, the search became more and more like a journey into the unknown depths of nature itself, which kept its secrets and did not give easy answers. The answers were hidden somewhere between the trees, around every corner, but they were never found. No matter how hard they tried to solve the mystery of Austin's disappearance, each attempt encountered a new obstacle. His tracks seemed to dissolve into thin air, and with each step, the searchers felt that something in these mountains was haunting them. The terrifying emptiness and the unknown force that hid the answers left them in increasing confusion. The forests of Yellowstone seemed to be full of invisible walls that did not allow them to go further and solve the riddle. But it was precisely in this ignorance, among the endless attempts to find tracks, that new and stranger discoveries began to appear, which made researchers believe that an ancient and dangerous secret was hidden in these mountains. In July 2023, when the search resumed, one of the first events that caused a triple shock in the ranks of the search team was the discovery of strange ritual objects. These objects, as further research showed, could not belong to any of the local tribes or tourists. They were too ancient and mysterious to be explained as ordinary attributes of everyday life. And although archaeologists, experts, and investigators could not immediately give exact explanations, none of the scientific explanations could consider these objects as something random. One such object was found in the very place where Austin was believed to have last made contact with the outside world. The team found a jagged stone slab with symbols and scenes that looked like ancient religious rituals. The drawings showed figures standing in front of a mysterious fire, and in the background were strange lines and circles that seemed not just drawings but maps or diagrams pointing to important points in the area. Local legends spoke of forgotten cults and secret rituals associated with Yellowstone, but until now, these stories were considered myths. However, with each passing day, it became increasingly clear that there was more to these symbols than just decoration or painting. Some of the researchers began to look for analogies with other ancient cultures, and soon references began to emerge to cults that worshiped the spirits of nature that once lived in these mountainous areas. But even those who initially doubted could not deny that these symbols and objects simply could not be accidental. This was not just a legacy, it was something that was trying to communicate some forgotten message to the world. Some theorists began to suggest that Austin's disappearance was not the result of an accident or a mistake on the trail, but rather that he had become part of something much older and more complex. They said that perhaps he had stumbled upon something that had been lurking in these parts for centuries, and that his disappearance was part of whatever nature the evil was that lurked in these mountains. Thus arose the theory that Yellowstone Park was not just a nature preserve, but a kind of custodian of ancient forces that began to awaken with the onset of certain cycles of time. Stories of strange lights, mysterious sounds, and the feeling of being watched began to take on new forms. And now it seemed that all of this could be connected to something more powerful and potent. Locals and researchers began to theorize that the disappearance of Austin King and others in the area could be connected to the fact that he had fallen victim to some kind of supernatural ritual or rite taking place in these ancient lands. Some tried to find a logical explanation for these events, while others could not shake the feeling that they had encountered something that defied explanation. Numerous historians who have explored the area have claimed that Yellowstone's nature has an extraordinary power locked within its depths. Stories of unexplained disappearances in these lands occasionally surfaced in historical records. With each passing year, they became more and more intricate and mystical. More and more often, references appeared to ancient rituals and cults that worshipped unknown entities living in these places. One local researcher who has spent years searching for ancient traces of civilizations in Yellowstone Park insisted that these disappearances are not random. "There is something more here than we can understand," he said, when asked to explain everything that has happened in recent years. The mountains, their fog, forests, and lakes, all of this seems to hide the true essence from us. Perhaps the disappearance of people is not a punishment, but rather a test that those who encounter this place go through. With each new discovery, with each new story, Austin's disappearance became an unsolved mystery, echoing throughout the city and among tourists. The further the search went, the more doubts arose. Were these disappearances the result of random tragedies, or were they part of an ancient veil, hiding an ancient history obscured by time? In Yellowstone, where the night brought dark silhouettes against fiery sunsets, every step became more uncertain. As the spring of 2024 wore on, the search for Austin King and other missing hikers in Yellowstone Park began to look more like something more than just a series of unfortunate events. More and more people began to realize that there was no easy explanation for the disappearances in the region. These mountains, these forests, and these lakes, places that had once seemed safe and teeming with life, were now symbols of uncertainty, mystery, and menace. With each passing year, the situation became more and more alarming. New disappearances, strange cases, such as the disappearance of locals and tourists, unexplained sounds heard in the night, and the same lights that appeared and disappeared in the forests only added fuel to the fire of hypotheses. Yellowstone was no longer perceived as an ordinary national park. It was a place that hid something more behind it, something that defied any logical explanation. When the search party returned to Eagle Peak in early May 2024, they were determined to finish the job. It had been nearly 2 years since Austin had disappeared, and almost all they had found were tracks that led nowhere. But the group didn't give up. This was their last chance to solve this dark mystery. The climb up Eagle Peak was difficult, especially considering that the mountains were prone to heavy snowfalls and gusty winds. The same silence that had haunted the searchers from the start reigned at the top of the mountain. Every step forward felt like a step into nothingness, into a place that was not alive in itself, but at the same time, it did not let go. The feeling of being watched, of something invisible watching their every move, had not left them from the moment they entered this cursed place. As the group reached the summit of Eagle Peak, something strange happened. One of the team members, who had been carefully following the map and landmarks, suddenly noticed that their route was starting to change in a strange way. The map did not match what they saw in reality. Right in front of them, against the backdrop of a high mountain, was another peak that they had never heard of. It was not marked on the map, and none of the explorers could remember when it was added to their route. This was not just a map error. It was as if something had suddenly ceased to be part of reality and became a manifestation of the unknown. It's hard to describe what it felt like, but for those on the summit, it felt like the mountain itself was beginning to change shape. The shadows grew longer, and the fog seemed to thicken, enveloping them as if trying to swallow each of them. The weather began to change too. Everything around them became somehow unreal, like a nightmare. But there was one thing that made the group feel truly afraid. They had no idea how they got to this place. At that moment, it became clear that neither the map nor the technology could help them. The strangest thing happened later. There were two of the group who stayed back, noticing several strange objects that suddenly appeared at the foot of the mountain. These objects were apparently lost items left behind by previous hikers, but their placement was completely out of place, as if someone or something had moved the items. Everything was in disarray, but it was precisely this disorganization and the strangeness of it all that made the participants' hearts clench. One of the objects was an item that belonged to Austin, his backpack with his belongings somewhat out of place, as if it had been left not in a hurry but with intent. This discovery left the team completely confused. What did it mean? Why was it here? How did his things end up in this place where they thought no one could be? The mystery of these places continued to threaten all who dared to seek answers. The legends and myths of strange disappearances in Yellowstone no longer seemed mere rumors. They were reality, part of the unknown that had always been in the shadows, hidden from prying eyes. The most frightening thought was that the mountain was silent, but it was not empty. There was no room for simple explanations in these places. Nature and its power had not simply created these mysteries. They were alive, beyond the control of man, and they continued to exist, disabusing those who tried to understand them. With each step, with each new discovery, Yellowstone became more and more unbearable and mysterious. Despite all efforts and searches, answers continued to elude, like the fog that covers the darkest corners of these mountains. All that remained was a silence that could not be pierced. The mountain peaks remained unyielding, and the shadows of the past carried a power that could not be understood and could not be deciphered. The summer of 2024 was spent searching. The search for the truth, the search for an answer, the search for something that could at least partially explain the disappearance of Austin King and other missing people, turned into a long and painful struggle. Time brought no peace to Austin's family, nor to the search team, nor especially to many others who continued to believe in the possibility of finding at least some traces. However, despite all efforts, the truth remained out of reach, and the mountain, as always, was silent. With each passing month, doubts about Austin's survival became more and more apparent. The search, which had begun as a mission with the firm goal of bringing him home, became more and more symbolic. Austin's father, Brian, did not give up, even though public opinion and the authorities had already accepted that his son could not be brought back. Brian was determined. "He's alive," he repeated like a mantra to anyone who would listen. For him, this was not just a search. It was a sacred duty to find his son, to understand what had happened. But no matter how hard they tried, nothing brought them closer to the truth. The Yellowstone Mountains continued to keep their secrets, leaving behind only emptiness and fog. Every year the search became more and more futile, especially since the terrain, which seemed one of the most dangerous and difficult to pass, opened up more and more insurmountable obstacles before them. Rocks, narrow gorges, avalanches, and unexpected changes in the weather. Nature was created to hide everything from view. But there were other forces that acted unnoticed, waiting. 2 years had passed since Austin had left this world, and each day felt less and less connected to reality. All the traces that had been so diligently sought had disappeared, and those that remained only indicated that this world and this park were not what they seemed. One day in August 2024, Brian King, despite his unwavering resolve, began to doubt. He sat all night at the edge of the forest where his son's last trace had been, looking at the stars. He saw the light grow dim, the ray of hope disappear. Those stars seemed not to be his son, but something else. Something watching him from afar, invisible and distant. He knew he couldn't make them come back, that he couldn't call his family back, but he kept going. The legends of Yellowstone Park, its unexplored corners and unexplained events, became more and more real. All that was left after the search was one huge, terrible emptiness. The more people tried to unravel the secrets of these lands, the fewer answers they could find. All they found were shadows, vanished traces, scraps of facts. It was as if everyone who tried to find something here simply disappeared. Austin, Paul, Daniel. Their disappearances became symbols of this mystery that would never be solved. While their names are still mentioned at wilderness safety conferences and conventions, Yellowstone itself continued to live its own life, hiding its secrets. Each disappearance was part of a cycle that defied human understanding or normal patterns. It was here, among the cold waters of the lakes and the deep shadows where the fog did not leave even on the clearest day, that there were questions that had no answers. No matter how hard people tried to understand what was happening, their attempts were lost in the thick, almost material emptiness. Eventually, the search ceased, and the case of the missing people in Yellowstone was officially closed. But for many of those who continued to search, the mystery remained alive. They knew that the mountain was silent, that its hearts and lights remained invisible, and that everyone who came here left a piece of themselves in this abyssal place. No matter how hidden their tracks, they continued to exist, simply vanished into the shadows, forever part of Yellowstone's misty world. And so, in the end, the disappearance of Austin King and the others became not only part of the park's history, but also part of the park itself, part of its unexplored secrets that were never solved. The mystery remained unsolved, the mountains remained silent, and all that remained was the question: what is this land hiding?